queer theory, and LGBTQ plus representation in global cinema. This culminating module explores queer theory as it applies to film and visual storytelling, analyzing how LGBTQ plus identities, desires, relationships, and politics are represented and often misrepresented in global cinematic traditions. It builds on the insights of feminist, psychoanalytic, postcolonial, and cultural theories to assess how film both reflects and shapes societal attitudes toward queerness. From coded characters in early Hollywood cinema to openly queer protagonists in independent and transnational film, LGBTQ plus representation has undergone a significant evolution. This module critically interrogates the history of queer visibility and invisibility in cinema, the politics of the closet and coming out narratives, the tension between queer subtext and explicit representation, intersectionality in queer cinema, and the emergence of a queer aesthetic in narrative structure, visual composition, and cinematic language. Importantly, this module places equal emphasis on global queer filmmaking, exploring how different cultures depict non-normative identities in relation to gender, tradition, colonial legacies, religion, and state censorship. Learning objectives. By the end of this module, you will be able to explain key concepts in queer theory and their relevance to visual storytelling, analyze the shifting patterns of LGBTQ plus representation across time and regions, identify heteronormative biases and queer-coded elements in mainstream cinema, evaluate how queer aesthetics challenge dominant narrative and visual forms, examine how global queer films resist or negotiate cultural, political, and religious boundaries. Section 1. Foundations of Queer Theory in Cinema. Queer theory challenges the binary and fixed understandings of gender and sexuality. Emerging from post-structuralism and gay-lesbian studies in the 1990s, it critiques heteronormativity as a cultural regime, views sexuality as fluid, performative, and socially constructed, rejects simplistic, essentialist identities, embraces ambiguity, contradiction, and nonlinearity. Key theorists include Judith Butler, Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, Jose Esteban Munoz, and Jack Halberstam, who have deeply influenced how scholars and filmmakers understand desire, identity, and performativity. In film, queer theory allows us to decode subtext and suppress desires, deconstruct the normal family romantic arc, center marginalized forms of pleasure, community, and storytelling. Section 2. A brief history of queer cinema. Early Hollywood, pre-code era to the 1950s. LGBTQ plus characters were often portrayed as sissies, deviants, or villains. Due to the Hays Code, explicit homosexuality was banned, 1934-1968, but directors used innuendo, performance, and costume to code queer identities. Examples: Rebecca, 1940, Mrs. Danvers as queer-coded, Ben-Hur, 1959, underlying homoerotic subtext, post-Stonewall, 1970s to 1990s. The gay rights movement inspired more open, if controversial, portrayals. Films like The Boys in the Band, 1970, Paris is Burning, 1990, and My Own Private Idaho, 1991, offered more diverse perspectives, though often still from male viewpoints. New queer cinema, 90s, coined by B. Ruby Rich, this wave of independent filmmaking was radical, raw, and resistant to mainstream aesthetics. Hallmarks included ambiguous identities, non-linear storytelling, low-budget authenticity, defiant tone against assimilationist politics. Notable films: Poison, 1991, Todd Haynes; The Living End, 1992, Greg Araki; Go Fish, 1994, Rose Troche. Section 3. Queer Aesthetics and Narrative Disruption. Queer films often abandon the traditional three-act structure and instead adopt fragmented, circular, or experimental narrative forms. Queer aesthetic features, time slippage and disorientation, shifting or unstable points of view, symbolic visual metaphors, mirrors, masks, duality, emphasis on desire, not just identity, non-closure, no clear resolution, transformation, or redemption. Halberstam's concept of queer time deviates from normative timelines, birth, marriage, career, family, death, embraces improvisation, risk, and community outside of state-sanctioned institutions. Examples: Weekend, 2011, short-lived intimacy between two men, non-linear progression. Moonlight, 2016, episodic portrait of Black queer life and identity over time. Hedwig and the Angry Inch, 2001, gender fluidity and rock musical narrative rupture. Section 4, Global queer cinemas and cultural resistance outside the West, queer filmmakers must often navigate. Section 5, Representation versus Realism, Ethics of Queer Storytelling. Key debates: Is visibility enough? Critique of positive image politics. Should queer stories center trauma or joy? Who gets to tell queer stories? Is assimilation, e.g., gay marriage, military service, liberation or erasure? These debates ask us to think deeply about the ethics of queer film. How do we avoid tokenism? How do we represent diverse intersectional identities authentically? How do trans people see themselves reflected, and who plays them? Key takeaways: Queer theory dismantles fixed identities and challenges heteronormative visual structures. Queer cinema often operates outside mainstream narrative and aesthetic norms. Representation has shifted from subtext and coding to explicit visibility, but not without controversy. Global queer cinema reveals both the diversity and the shared struggles of LGBTQ+ people. Ethical, intersectional, and inclusive storytelling is crucial for meaningful queer visibility.